In this video, we'll be looking at how we add a new property to Chintaro. To add a new property into the system, from the home screen, we click on Properties in the main menu, then Manage Properties. When we're on the Property search screen, we'll add a new property by clicking the Add Property button here. We're adding our new property at 15 Spencer Street, and in the first field of the property's name, we're going to enter the property as Spencer Street 15. When we're entering properties into Chintaro, it's recommended calling the property by its street name and then its number, so that when we sort the properties in the search screens or produce reports with property names, the properties will sort in alphabetical order. The account number is where we can record a number or code that's used by a different system for this property, and this is optional, so we'll skip past it on this occasion. The next field will have a field name depending on the state or country we're in, and because we're in Victoria, this says ISIP, but this could say UPI or CPG. If we have any of these numbers, we enter them here. If not, we leave it blank. Next is the address where we'll enter 15 Spencer Street, and this is in Melbourne. When we're adding a city and we press Tab on the keyboard, the state and postcode are populated automatically. But if we need to change this city, we drop the list down and find the correct city. The next field is region, and this is a way that we can group our properties into geographic regions. If we want to group our properties by region, we select an option from the drop-down list. The online date refers to the date that the property came into our organisation's possession, which will default to today. If we need to return the property back at any stage, we enter the returned date in this field. The Target Group field allows us to record whether the property is targeted towards a sector of the community. For example, if the property was targeted to the elderly, homeless, or single parents. The program field is important as this field is used to identify which part of the business the property is used for. For example, crisis housing, transitional housing, and so on. Grouping properties by program allows us to report on properties within a program, and in this example, we'll say that the property is being used in our transitional housing program. The property type field identifies what type of property it is, and in this case, this property is a house. The property source drop-down is only used for New South Wales Chintaro users who need to run the CAPM report. If this is the case, select the appropriate property source from the drop-down list. We can select the construction type of the property, record the land area, the last valuation amount for the property, and the last valuation date. The Charge To field is one that we'll skip over, but briefly, this field is used if we're creating weekly property charges, and we'll look at this field in a later video. On the right-hand side, we can enter the following fields numerically: number of bedrooms, toilets, bathrooms, the number of cars it can house in the garage, and if it has space for a number of cars in a carport. We can record our internal or external property managers in this drop-down list. Property managers may not necessarily be internal to our organisation. They could be a real estate agent, or they could be another external party who is responsible for managing the property. We'll select a property manager from here, and similarly, we can record the owner of our properties in this drop-down list, and this property is owned by Michael Jackson. If we have a head contractor who is responsible for all the maintenance of this property, we could select from this list, but we don't have to allocate a head contractor as this property may be maintained by several different contractors, so we'll leave this field blank. The cost centre field is used to record the specific cost centre for this property, which can be included in exports, including exports to the general ledger, and we'll look at this in our video exporting to the general ledger. We can record how our property is funded and, in this example, we'll select Head Leasing. The project code field can be used in any way that our organisation would like as a further grouping of our properties. We'll skip past the project code field for now. Nomination rights are used to record an individual or organisation who have rights in saying who can be tenanted into this property when a room becomes available. For example, the owner of this property may have the right to nominate who may be able to be tenanted into this property. For maintenance purposes, we can record the hot water type, stove type, and heating type for our properties, and in this case, the hot water is electric, the stove is electric, and the heating is electric as well. The sewerage, power, and water will default to mains, but can be changed as well if required. If we have an NRAS dwelling ID for the property, we enter it here, as well as the NRAS date, and any general comments about the property can be made in this section. In the middle section of the property screen, we have the rooms section. In Chintaro, the number of rooms at the property equals the number of tenantable units we have, or the number of tenancy agreements we can have on the property. If we have a 2 or 3 bedroom house, but the house can only have a single household tenanted, we'll create one room because there will only be one tenancy agreement for the property. If we have a 3 bedroom house and it's a shared housing model where we have 3 tenancies, each with their own tenancy agreement, we'll create 3 rooms, one for each tenancy agreement. If we have a rooming house model of property where we have one property and many rooms, each with their own number and tenancy agreement, we'll add as many rooms as the house is able to accommodate. We must have at least one room in a property, even if that room is an entire house, and if we don't enter at least one room, we won't be able to create a tenancy in that property. This property can accommodate one household or one tenancy agreement, so we will add one room to the property. To do this, we click the Add Room button and the room details pop-up appears. The only time we enter a number in this box is if we have a rooming house model property where each room has an actual number. This isn't a rooming house, so we'll leave this field blank and move down to Type. When we add a room to Chintaro, we must always select a type from the drop-down list. This is a house, so we'll select House from this list. Nomination rights can be applied at the room level, so if there is an organisation or individual that has the right to nominate who can be tenanted into each room, we can select them here. If not, we leave it blank. A payment book ID can be allocated at the room level, and this is the unique reference number a tenant would use to pay their rent, so that when rent is received, Chintaro knows to allocate it to this room. We'll leave this for the moment and look at the payment book ID more when we look at creating a tenancy, and in finance functions such as importing payments. On the right-hand side of this pop-up box, we have details regarding inspections, which we'll also look at when we create inspections, so we'll leave this for now. In this section, we can see the status of this room is vacant tenantable. It's vacant and able to have a tenancy, and the current tenancy status is not tenanted because we've just created this room. If we're charging a fixed rate for the room, regardless of who the tenants are or who the household is, we could enter the rent record or how much we're charging in rent and other charges every week for this room here. But we'll leave this as we charge rent based on income, and we'll determine how much we'll charge when we create a tenancy. Once we've finished with this pop-up box, we'll click Update, and in the middle Rooms section of the property, we now have one row with a house, the tenancy status is vacant tenantable, and there is no tenancy. Moving across to the right of the screen, we have 6 sections for tags for our properties, and we'll cover these in a later video. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen, we have the notes relating to the property only. For example, notes about maintenance and inspections will be recorded in this section. The notes for a property work in the same way that notes do for a client screen, in that they remain with the property for the life of the property. At the top of the property screen, we see several blue buttons for additional functions for the property, which we'll look at in later videos. We can see the history of all the changes we have made to the property in the audit, which is in this icon with 3 dots, which, When clicking, we'll bring up an audit history of what changes were made, who made the changes, and the date and time the changes were made. Once we have finished entering our property, we click the Exit button, and from the property search screen, if we click Show All to refresh this screen, we can see our new property here.